A group of theologians are petitioning bishops of the world to call Pope Francis out for heresy. Who are they? And are their concerns valid? Founder and publisher of Ignatius Press, Father Joseph FESSIO, weighs in. And is today's culture suffering from a crisis of stupidity? Catholic League President Bill DONOHUE thinks so. He'll tell us about his new book, Sense Catholicism. And finally, the persecution of Christians is on the rise all over the world. What is causing the increase in violence? Director of the Center for Religious Freedom at the Hudson Institute, SHEA, is here with analysis. The world over begins right now.
Now, from Washington, D.C., Raymond Arroyo.
A warm welcome to all of you joining us in the United States and the world over. A very important show for you tonight. Father Joseph FESSIO, Bill DONOHUE, and SHEA are all straight ahead. If you'd like to comment on tonight's show, send me a tweet. I'm at Raymond Arroyo. Lots to cover this evening. I want to get right to it. Recently, a group of at least 51 theologians, academics, and clergy issued a 20-page open letter imploring the bishops of the world to admonish Pope Francis for what they describe as the canonical delict of heresy. Who are the signatories? What are they charging? And what do they hope to achieve? Joining me now with analysis is Jesuit priest and founder and editor of Ignatius Press, Father Joseph FESSIO. He joins us from his offices in San Francisco. Father FESSIO, thank you for being here.
Sure, Raymond, good to see you.
50-plus Catholics, including prominent theologian and author Father Aidan Nichols, have published this open letter accusing the Pope of heresy. How much credibility do these signatories have? Many in the audience won't even know who they are. Fill us in, Father.
Well, that's true, Raymond. Actually, this is not the only letter like this has been issued. Back in July of 2016, 45 theologians and clergymen wrote a letter that had 8 propositions which they thought should be condemned, that had been made by Pope Francis. And then in September of 2016, we had the dubia by the cardinals, 5 questions. And in December, 2 very well-known theologians, Germain Grisey and John Finnis, said that their concern was precisely that what Pope Francis had said in Amoris Laetitia and elsewhere would be misinterpreted and used for wrong purposes. So now this particular statement comes out. You asked about the credibility.
Right.
Well, there's no really world-class theologians that are there as far as I can see, except for Aidan Nichols, who definitely is a renowned, serious theologian. Mm-hmm. However, even people who aren't world-class or people who are simply hypercritical can sometimes say something worthwhile. So I think we have to look at the document itself. As you know, there are 7 statements.
Yeah, Father, let me get into those. I'm going to share those with the audience, just so they have a little sense of what's being proposed here. The letter goes through, as Father said, 7 areas of Catholic teaching which the signatories believe Pope Francis has deviated from, contradicting divinely revealed truth in their terminology. Among the things they charge, 1, a Christian believer can have full knowledge of a divine law and voluntarily choose to break it in a serious manner, but not be in a state of mortal sin as a result of that action. 2, they say conscience can truly and rightly judge that sexual acts between persons who have contradicted a civil marriage with each other, although one or other of them is sacramentally married to another person, can sometimes be morally right or requested or even commanded by God. They also charge that the Pope in his teaching is claiming that it's false, that only sexual acts that are good are those between a husband and a wife. And then they say God not only permits but positively wills the pluralism and diversity of religions, both Christian and non-Christian. Of course, that's a reference to something the Pope said when he was visiting the Middle East a few weeks ago. The letter highlights what the signatories believe to be problematic passages of Amoris Laetitia, Father. They reference a number of bishops and cardinals and priests whom they claim are themselves heretical, and the Pope has appointed or allowed them to remain in office. Now, I get the upsetment with all of this. We've covered this for years now. But is this heresy? And is this the proper vehicle to bring these critiques forward?
The question is exactly that, Raymond. Is what the Pope has said heretical? They cite the Pope, especially Amoris Laetitia, and they interpret it in such a way that it would be heretical. And then they look at what the Pope has done with respect to these other bishops, priests, and cardinals, whom he supported, and so on, to show that that confirms their suspicion or their claim that the proper interpretation of these statements of Pope Francis are heretical, is heretical. So that's the question. I want to read one thing quickly, Raymond, from Ignatius' Book of the Exercises, which, of course, the Pope would be well familiar with. Ignatius, at the very beginning, says, every good Christian ought to be more willing to give a good interpretation to the statement of another than to condemn it as false. Now, that applies especially to the Pope. We have to try and put the best interpretation we can. However, it also applies to this letter. We have to try and give them the best interpretation. Ignatius goes on to say, if he cannot give a good interpretation to this statement, he should ask the other how he understands it, and if he is in error, should correct him with charity. So, I think both sides in this thing, those who have questioned what the Pope says is possibly heretical, and the Pope himself, have to be looked at. But here's the thing, Raymond, which is critical for me. The statements that are made in this letter are carefully made by people who are intelligent, and there is a plausibility to the interpretation they give to Amoris Laetitia. I think it's important that someone representing the Pope or on behalf of the Pope make it clear why this heretical interpretation is not the correct one, why in fact we must interpret Amoris Laetitia with tradition.
Critics of this letter, like Father Thomas Petri, who's been on this show before, he's here at the Dominican House of Studies, he writes the following. He says, I'm disappointed that a group of theologians, some of whom I admire, chose to express themselves by contributing to a letter calling the Pope a heretic. Their citations of him can be all interpreted in a way that gives the Holy Father the benefit of the doubt, which we owe him. This is what you're saying. But most importantly, he goes on, no ecclesial authority is competent to judge a reigning pope guilty of a canonical delict of heresy. In fact, I suspect Canons 1372 and 1373 will be invoked here. I pray these esteemed scholars will recant and find a better way to express their concerns. As you know, Father FESSIO, those canons prohibit calling the Pope a heretic, essentially, and there are canonical penalties associated with doing so.
Well, that's another question, Raymond, and I'm not a canon. You ask Father Murray about that, or maybe Ed Peters. But they do in the letter bring up that issue, and they do cite some very important traditional sources saying that, no, they as theologians can't criticize, can't condemn a Pope of heresy, but the bishops have a responsibility to make it clear whether or not, have the Pope make it clear why his statements are not heretical. And if they are, if the Pope resists doing that, then the bishops have some role, and again, I'm not a canonist here, but to do something.
Well, the canon reads, I'm going to read it to you, Canon 1372, we'll put it on screen. A person who appeals from an act of the Roman Pontiff to an ecumenical council or to the College of Bishops is to be punished with a censure. Then going on, 1373, canon. A person who publicly incites his or her subjects to hatred or animosity against the Apostolic See or the ordinary because of some act of ecclesiastical authority or ministry, or who provokes the subjects of disobedience against them, is to be punished by interdict or other just penalties. Do you think those canons might be invoked? And, could this letter even be acknowledged by anybody in the Vatican? Do you think they'll acknowledge it?
Well, that's a very good question, Raymond, because I think we have to give the best interpretation to all sides in this. And the point is, there are people who may be misinterpreting how canon law should be applied, but who are very concerned about ambiguity. Certainly, no one in his right mind can deny that there's ambiguity, nor that people are using what the Pope has said to support positions which are false or heretical or contradictory. So there is confusion. I mean, anybody who says not confusion is confused. All right? That proves it.
But Father, we've seen, you mentioned it earlier, there was the dubia where you had 4 cardinals asking questions formally of the Pope to clarify, and again, this is all around Amoris Laetitia. Then you had a filial correction that came out. Father Thomas Weinhardy, who said that the Pope, he's censoring and even mocking critics. Father Thomas Weinandy. And then you had the Vigano testimony. I mean, this is on and on and on. What is different this time? And might framing it as a charge of heresy repel the Pope and those around him to just say, you know, these people aren't to be taken seriously, since they wouldn't even respond to the other charges?
It might, except for the fact that the clarity and substantiveness of this letter are something which I think require a response. It's a human thing. As Mark Brumley, my colleague here at Ignatius Press, said so well this morning, the Pope should perhaps think of hiring Catholic answers, because when they're asked questions, they give answers. You know, and I think we need that.
But they can't remove a pope. This is the other thing. They're appealing to the bishops, but I don't understand what the bishops are going to do. Are they just going to say, Holy Father, you need to clarify this, you're wrong? There's no mechanism to force the Pope to resign or to evict the Pope. You just can't do it.
Well, I mean, what if a Pope should decide to get married and become a Muslim? Would he cease to be Pope?
Well, I don't know. That would have to go to a theologian and a canon lawyer. But
okay. So the point is, if there are significant bishops who can just have a dialogue with the Pope and make it clear that the Pope does interpret these things heretically and knows he interprets them heretically, then they're not deposing him. He's by himself abdicating the office. I think that's the logic behind this. I'm not saying I agree with it. I'm just saying that what do you do? I mean, what do you do? I mean, do we say that because of the Holy Spirit's protection, a Pope could never formally become a heretic? Is that's not part of Scripture. So that can be debated. So what happens if a Pope does become a formal heretic? What happens?
Yeah, I just think it's very dangerous territory here. It's one thing to say, Holy Father, in charity, we think you may have erred here in your expression, and will you clarify? Which is what all these other efforts attempted to do. But now when you have a group saying, you're a heretic and you should resign, that's a very different posture. And I am concerned that the average or the common man looking into this goes, what's going on here?
That's true, but what about the common man looking at the bishops of Germany and what's going on in Germany, saying, if there's a Pope approve of that? I mean, well, I guess everything's okay, right?
No, it's a mess. I agree. I agree with it. It's a mess. I'm not sure of this vehicle to promote change for the good. I'm just not sure. Given the record that I just cited and the lack of response, I don't think we're going to hear anything from the Vatican about this letter. I think it's going to be utterly ignored.
If I wrote your superiors and accused you of being a heretic and said you should be removed, what would you do?
Well, I have superiors. The Pope doesn't. The Pope has no superior except God and Jesus himself. So I guess we appeal to them in the meantime. Okay, I want to move on to one thing. I've got to show this to you. There is a draft that has been leaked, and this is about curial reform in the Vatican, reforming the offices in the Vatican. This alleged draft creates a new dicastery, that's a new office, for evangelization by combining the Congregation for the Evangelization of Peoples and the Council for the New Evangelization, and subordinate to that will be the Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith. What do you make of this, putting evangelization above doctrine?
Well, if you might put it above, in an organizational chart, but you can't separate doctrine from evangelism. What are you going to be evangelizing about? You're preaching the truth, right? So, I think Thomas Rees's article in the National Catholic Reporter Online was quite good in many ways.
I agree with you. Yeah, and I don't often agree with much in that paper.
But I think I've often said this because, Raymond, you and I know people in the Curia. We've known them for years. There's a lot of good, hardworking, serious people there who are admirable. And the way to reform the Curia is to have people there who are good people.
Right.
And however you structure it, unless you got the good people that are in the structure, you're not going to reform anything. And of course, evangelization is the purpose of the church. But the point is, someone who opens the mail at the CDF or someone who's filing there, that person is not on the street preaching, but that person is contributing to evangelization by helping those who are out in the field. Anyway.
Yeah, it's structure over personnel, and that may be a misplaced sense of reform. I've got to get your reaction to this. I saw this, so many people sent this to me. It was floating online. This is a priest, and we don't know where he is, but it appears to be an Easter service, and he's sprinkling holy water over the congregation, but it looks more like a comedy routine. I mean, he's literally pouring water on people, and they're all laughing about it and yucking it up. Your reaction to this video?
Raymond, Aspergus is a wonderful thing, especially in an Easter vigil. But that just shows how a good thing can be taken too far. Listen to the soundtrack there. People are gigging, they're laughing, they're clapping. That's not the reverence you want to have. Yes, joy at the resurrection. I was at the Easter vigil with Bishop Basha in Santa Rosa. I mean, beautiful. Homily was wonderful. The service was beautiful. And the choir was absolutely angelic. I was weeping. Well, there was joy there. But, you know, it was joy within reverence. And so when you lose the reverence, then the whole purpose of the service, it seems to me, is lost.
I agree. No, it looked like Rip Taylor, walking through one of those talk shows in the 70s. Thank you so much, Father FESSIO, for being
thanks,
here.
Raymond.
You can find out the latest offerings from Ignatius Press at ignatius.com. Joining me now to talk about the rise of stupidity in today's culture and what he says is the perfect antidote is the president of the Catholic League and author of the brand new book, Sense Catholicism, How to Resolve Our Cultural Crisis. Dr. Bill DONOHUE joins me live in studio.
Thank
Bill,
you
great
so much,
to see you
Raymond.
here.
Thank you.
Tell me about this book. You say we have a crisis, and the extremely affluent and well-educated is really causing this crisis. You write this: stupidity is not a lack of knowledge. For example, if someone doesn't know how to hard-boil an egg, he's not stupid. He simply hasn't learned how to do it. Stupidity is many things, but most of all, it is a lack of common sense, as in sound judgment. How did we as a culture get so stupid?
Well, it's amazing. The idea of intellectuals, a lot of them not having common sense. This is known by people way before Bill DONOHUE. Thomas Jefferson understood it. Orwell understood it. Chesterton understood it. Bill Buckley and many others. But I've taught every grade from the second grade through newly minted PhDs from around the world at NYU. Now, there's a lot of great intellectuals, don't get me wrong, but many of them, particularly in the social sciences and humanities, are positively dysfunctional. And the ideas that they have, they live in a world of fiction and delusion. They believe, for example, that a man can become a woman can become a man just by willing it. They believe that a woman who's pregnant is not carrying a baby. That's not the real world. They come up with the stupidest ideas I've ever seen, and they don't believe in human nature. That's where it comes from. If you reject human nature, if you think everything is a social construct, and of course you reject nature's God because you're too smart to believe in God, then you're going to get everything wrong. That's where it begins. By the rejection of human nature and the rejection of God leads you to this world of fiction, which they entertain wildly in the academy.
You spend a lot of time and a lot of firepower in this book on the academy.
Yeah.
Why?
Because having spent so many years in education, 20 years in education before I took this job, and then continuing to educate as well at NYU, I've never met people who are so wildly out of touch as the intellectuals and the people whom they affect. For example, all the leading feminists in this country and in Europe, every one of them, well, practically almost every one of them wound up in the asylum. People don't know this. These people had all kinds of problems themselves. And if you find out what's going on in the universities, so many of the people who are advising young people today don't themselves have their act together, so to speak. How they get through the day, I'm not exactly certain. But their ideas, they may not intentionally be pernicious, but because you don't understand common sense, and they've got not a lick of it, the damage that they've done to the norms, the values, public policy, and the law in this country is huge.
I want to get to the remedies you suggest in the book in a moment, but I got to play this for you. This is the president this week at the National Day of Prayer. Here's what he said at the White House. Watch.
As we unite on this day of prayer, we renew our resolve to protect communities of faith and to ensure that all people and all of our people can live and pray and worship in peace. And as God promises in the Bible, those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on the wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary, and they will walk and not be faint. And that's something that Mike and I think about all the time. Right, Mike?
Give me your sense on what this administration has done for religious liberty, religious freedom. Compare it to other administrations before it, Republican and Democrat.
I've never seen, look, I know people have problems with the persona of the president, okay? And there are legitimate reasons. He gives you a lot of things to chew on. But if you're asking about policy now, get away from persona. When it comes to religious liberty, for example, in fighting for religious exemptions, which are under assault in this country today, when it comes to marriage, when it comes to the life issue, when it comes to abortion, I don't know of any president in my lifetime who has been stronger. Reagan was great. The Bushes were good, but Trump has gone beyond them all. Now, people might say, well, I don't know how sincere he is. I don't know how, I don't have a sincerity measure, okay? I don't know that. All I know is what he delivers. And what he delivers in terms of fighting for religious exemptions and religious liberty, I've never seen a man like it. He's a breath of fresh air at the top level.
What do you make? We're seeing something in this emerging Democratic field of the 2020 contenders. The rise of the religious left, Mayor Pete Buttigieg saying, look, I'm a religious person, I'm a moral person, you know, I have this lifestyle, my lifestyle choice, but that doesn't make me less of a religious person. Is there a religious left out there? Is there an audience for this?
Yeah, there's about 10 or 12. Listen, the religious left, they're almost indistinguishable from the secular left. In other words, when it comes to their socialist vision, they're the same. But what is the difference between the religious left? They're all pro-abortion. We know that. What about when it comes to marriage? They're in favor of gay marriage and the like. Transgender, I mean, there's no difference for them whatsoever. So what Buttigieg is trying to do is to say, I'm like Obama. I've got the rhetoric of religion. I'm good on God talk, but people aren't stupid. Mormons, Muslims, traditional Catholics, evangelical Protestants, Orthodox Jews, they want to know where you are on sexuality and marriage and on life. He's indistinguishable with the religious left from the secular left. Good luck to him.
I want to talk about this Pew study. 58% of Americans say they believe religion is less important today in society. We're seeing the explosion of the nones, people who don't identify with any religion. In fact, they now outnumber Catholics. What's happening? Is America less religious than it was?
It is less religious, and how could it not be? Getting back to the wizards, the great geniuses, the intellectuals in the academy, they've secularized our society. What are they taught in the schools? Everything is about relativism. There's no such thing as truth. You know who believed that? You know who said that there's no such thing as truth? It wasn't just the great philosophers of the postmodernists and Foucault and the like. It was Adolf Hitler. Those were his exact words. So if you don't believe there's truth, what you're down to is mere opinion. The Catholic Church, however, is rich with traditions and teachings based in Scripture, and we've got the answer to this secular madness which has colored our society.
You frame in the book Common Sense Catholicism, you look to the aspirations of the French Revolution.
Right.
Liberty and equality and fraternity, and you kind of hang your arguments there, and how Catholicism are the true guardians of those aspirations. Where did the revolution get it wrong, and where do we still get it wrong today?
It all comes down to what I said before. Common sense. Is there such a thing as human nature? Once you deny there is, look, I detail what Donald Brown, the anthropologist, has said, over 300 human universals, over 300 human characteristics which are found in every society in the history of the world. For example, motherhood. Why is it that the woman, the mother, is closer to the child than the father? She gives birth. Yet it's taught at Smith College. The president of Smith College in 2019 says that motherhood is a cultural invention. No, that's a fiction, people. Motherhood is, the culture follows nature. And they don't want to see, once you believe that no such thing as nature, you can't make my argument. Society and the Catholic Church take their cues from nature. We have a responsible idea of freedom. Freedom is the right to do what you ought to do. It's about somebody else. It's about responsibilities. The culture teaches license. We teach that not every inequality is a manifestation of an inequity. Okay? When the guy wins the gold medal in the Olympics, you don't give the gold medal to the guy who came in last, right? You give it to the guy who came in first. That would be fairness. And we respect tradition. We don't want to denigrate Western civilization, which was built by the Catholic Church, all the great things. That's what's doing in the academy today. In higher education, they trash Western civilization with multiculturalism. That's not an answer to anything.
I want to share with you something, and I know you've written about this. Governor Doug Ducey in Arizona wrote a very innocuous Facebook Easter greeting and saying, you know, Happy Easter to everybody. He was attacked. He refuses to apologize or withdraw it. What is happening where something like that, just a civil expression of celebration for a religious holiday, that becomes a cause de célèbre and a point of friction in the culture? What's happened?
Well, what's happened is that we've gone from a culture where some people were indifferent to religion to a culture where a lot of people hate religion. They're militant secularists. Paul Kurtz was a good friend of Sidney Hook, whom I studied under at NYU, and he was a secularist. He was an atheist. Before he died, he said, I want nothing to do with these people, these new atheists. They're all angry. They're all haters. And what you're doing to Catholics and to priests is simply wrong. They threw him out of the organization that he actually founded. That's how mad this whole situation has become. And again, the intellectuals, they're violating the sin of pride in the Catholic Church because they know better than everybody. They know better than God. Sure
I want to put up a full screen, something you write. You write in the book, we need to rely more on wisdom than on knowledge, and more on experience than on ideology. Not to do so is to ensure the triumph of stupidity, yielding outcomes that even intellectuals abhor.
Yes, right. Give me Aristotle, not Plato. Give me somebody who's a realist who understands wisdom over knowledge. And, you know, if you have an ailment and you go to a doctor and he makes the wrong diagnosis, he can really screw you up. And then if he doubles down and he tries to figure, I got a new remedy, he's going to destroy you. We do this with the culture. The same people have the same lousy ideas who have screwed up everything. Why do we have such high STD rates today, but we didn't have them in the 50s? Because people don't practice a modicum of restraint. I mean, common sense would tell you, use the brakes that God gave you. And when it comes to money and sex and smoking and drinking and gambling and every kind of expression, if you let it go to extremes, you're going to destroy the individual. People with common sense understand that. The guy who teaches in the humanities and the social sciences, he hasn't got a clue.
I want to change gears just a little bit, but it's very similar to something you just mentioned. You talked about a doctor diagnosing a problem. Pope Benedict recently wrote a letter diagnosing this sex abuse crisis. He, too, was pilloried for it. Your take on what he had to say?
He was brilliant. What he was saying is this. He wasn't exculpating anybody who made a mistake as a bishop or a priest. What he's saying is this. The sexual revolution, first it manifested itself in the society at large, and then it made its way into the church itself. I'm a sociologist. You look at the social context. You can't say that we didn't have a sexual revolution within the church. It was in the seminaries in the 70s.
It was in the world, yeah.
In particular, well, what he was saying is this is where it comes from. And he wasn't afraid to talk about homosexuality. You know, we have such dishonesty in Catholic quarters in particular. I'm not here to beat up on homosexuals, but I'm not here to lie. And that is to say that I'm not going to pretend that we don't have a real problem, or at least we did in a big way, with homosexuals acting out. Why, for example, in 2002, have we had very few incidences of sexual abuse in this country? Because finally, the Catholic Church, instead of giving the green light to homosexuals acting out, they put up a big red light and a stop sign and said, stop. All of a sudden, they stopped, didn't they? Very few problems. That means they could have used the brakes that God gave them. But guess what? The word got out. The party's over, fellas. Grow up.
What do you make of the renewed attention now, lifting of statute of limitations in certain dioceses? We're seeing it in your own Diocese of New York and around the country. A good idea? Some say this is justice, Bill.
It's madness because I've seen what happened in Illinois and New York and Sacramento just recently. These guys are either dead or out of ministry. So if you want to do something about it, the problem, do about it today and what's going on.
Right
Go
now.
ahead at the Catholic Church. You won't find a whole lot there. This is a race to the bottom. They're trying to deal with the people back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. They're mostly dead. And if you want to open up the door for us, then please do it with other religions in the public school. We know the problem is largely behind us in this country today. So I'm not in favor of wasting people's money. They did it in Pennsylvania. What did they get out of it? 2 people that they were able to find. In Illinois, just recently, they named 395 abusive priests going back about 50, 60, 70 years. Guess how many they're still around? 1. I mean, this what are they searching for? This is all politically driven, and it's driven by religious profiling. It's discrimination against Catholics.
Okay, let's talk about the reception this movie received in the New York Times. Put your cultural hat on. Hail Satan. This is a documentary, and in it, Satan and those who follow him are portrayed as open-minded, First Amendment lovers.
Well, Variety said that Satan was a free thinker, so I guess the case is closed.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. I'm too stupid to figure that out. Variety's a lot smarter than Bill Donahue. They figured that he's a free thinker. But look,
I've never met him, but I'll ask him
I never
when
met
he
him
shows
either.
up.
But you know, this kind of madness, they're applauding them because they use their pitchforks as in Arizona to pick up litter along the highways, and they said they give people socks. I want to know, why do they stop with the socks? Don't these people need shoes? All right? I mean, this is kind of madness. I engaged them, by the way. I said, why are you so pro-abortion at the Satanic Temple? And they said, well, it's personal freedom. I said, well, a right of a woman to abort her child, what does that do to the right of that child to be born? They said, well, it's not a baby. I said, so what is it? Well, they never got back at me. Maybe it's a seal. I don't know.
Bill, I know why they only give socks. Because the hooves don't fit into shoes, Bill. You can only put socks on. Okay, we got to talk about Bill Nye, the science guy, who may have a different title by the time this is over. And it relates to what you're talking about in Common Sense Catholicism. He believed, and he says this in a recent documentary, that parents who have too many children, because of the strain and the drain to natural resources, should be penalized, charged for the extra children they have.
Yeah, well, this is totalitarian. There's no other word for it in the English language, okay? We saw that in this country with Margaret Sanger wanting to get rid of black people. The Planned Parenthood founder, people should know that. And we've seen it, of course, in Nazi Germany. The Germans today have the best laws on eugenics. They're not going to allow for what happened once before. They wouldn't put up with a guy like Nye. And if he thinks we have too many people in our world today, then maybe he should take some of his own medicine. Why is he still telling us about this?
Yeah, the older folks use up most of the resources anyway, so maybe, you know, he could offer himself for the common good. Tell me what you want people to come away thinking. How do you want to alter their thinking after they read this book? And why did you labor over it? I mean, this is a book you wrote in the midst of all your other work, which is not an easy thing, given what you do every day.
I think everybody on all sides know we have a cultural crisis. I'm basically arguing that this country was founded on the Judeo-Christian ethos for a couple of hundred years. People didn't always have to agree with it. But once that became ripped up by people in the academy, at the higher intellectuals, and they're challenging us with this militant secularism, we have a divide in the country between one side and the other. The Catholic Church's teachings, I'm not saying all the teachers, the Catholic Church's teachings are a repository of wisdom. Go back and read what the Church says and read the 10 Commandments and then try to follow it in our laws, our public policy, and our norms and values. And don't listen to the crackpots in the university. There's more common sense and more free speech allowed in a local pub in the United States today than there is on the local college campus.
Bill Donahue, thank you so much for being here. The book is Common Sense Catholicism, How to Resolve Our Cultural Crisis by Dr. Bill Donahue. It's available at bookstores everywhere and online, including the EWTN Religious Catalog. They're at EWTNRC.com. Nina SHEA is up next, but first, some news. On Wednesday evening, President Trump spoke to faith leaders at a White House dinner in honor of the National Day of Prayer. He paid respects to Jewish Americans killed and wounded at last week's synagogue shooting in California, the victims of attacks in Sri Lanka on Easter Sunday, and Muslims in New Zealand last month. He also cited the burning of 3 black churches in Louisiana and last year's shooting at a Pittsburgh synagogue. The president had this to say.
Tonight we break bread together, united by our love of God, and we renew our resolve to protect the sacred freedom of religion, all of us. Violence and terrorism against people of all faiths must end, and it must end now.
Joining me now with analysis is the director of the Center for Religious Freedom at the Hudson Institute, Nina Shea. Nina, thanks for being back.
Great to be back.
Let's talk about this shooting, the second attack on a synagogue in the U.S. To what do you attribute this rise in anti-Semitism?
Yeah, well, it comes from different sources, Raymond, and we're seeing it. It's unusual for the United States at this period in our history to see this. So this is a lone wolf from a conservative background, a churchgoer, from a Boy Scout, conservative. We don't know enough about it, but the government has to protect synagogues. There has to be protection to stop it. There are, in other countries, we're seeing, and even here, we're seeing radical Islamists attacking synagogues as well.
Right.
That was true in France, and it's true here. In the last 4 months, the FBI have picked up and intercepted and thwarted 2 attacks on synagogues by extremists linked to ISIS or inspired by ISIS here in this country.
So it's
one in Ohio, one in California. Yeah.
So it's the ideology that is radicalizing these people here.
Yes.
And provoking them to these acts.
There is different ideologies involved, but it's and we're seeing anti-Semitism in the left as well, the far left. Not even progressive left, I should say. You see it with Representative Omar's statements.
Right.
And the New York Times ran a
Horrible
cartoon of Israel represented by their prime minister with as a dog, with the Star of David around the dog collar. That's a sacred image to Jews.
Outrageous.
Outrageous.
It's an outrageous image. I want to talk about the Christian persecution that we're seeing rise as well. We had 6 people killed in Burkina Faso, which is in Western Africa.
Yeah.
Then we, of course, the 200 plus killed in Sri Lanka. To what do you attribute this targeting of Christians all around the world?
Yeah, well, again, it's different from place to place because you're seeing targeting of churches in France and other places.
Right.
But those particular cases in Sri Lanka and Burkina Faso, it's Islamic extremism again. It's ISIS that's directing it, that's advising it in those places. And it's, again, a failure of the government to protect these houses of worship.
What can the U.S. government do to protect these minority groups, and particularly these houses of worship, not only here but around the world?
Yeah, well, the U.S. has been giving intelligence to the government of Sri Lanka, and they failed to act on it. And they said it's going to be prominent Christian churches, and it's a very small population. There's 7% of the population. There aren't that many Catholic churches there, and they got them, and they targeted them. There was no steps taken by the governments there. But we can train, we can share intelligence, and we have to, here at home, ensure there's proper training of the congregations and the rabbis, and even some protection maybe by the government is warranted in certain neighborhoods.
Nina, we've been covering this for years, and though we see the Sri Lankan, example, and kind of people are focused on it, in Africa, this is almost routine. It's a weekly occurrence. I read a report with an interview with a Nigerian archbishop who's saying they're killing our people like chickens in northern Nigeria.
Yes.
What is happening there, and why aren't we hearing more about it?
Yes, this is a northern and to a certain extent central Nigeria. Nigeria is half a Christian and half Muslim. And this area, these are radical Muslims, again, or extremists. Boko Haram is a terror group that has pledged allegiance to ISIS. And they have attacked about 900 churches, according to some sources, in Nigeria, and filled with worshipers. Again, on Christmas, the Catholic Church, St. Teresa was attacked one year. There are other major holy days filled with worshipers. And then there's also community people from the Fulani herdsmen who are also been radicalized, and they express their desire for land and a better lifestyle by killing Christians and taking it. But I have talked to, Raymond, I have talked to Protestant pastors who were shot in the head. The one survived. He came and talked to me, showed me his X-ray of his shattered skull, and for refusing to convert to Islam when the Boko Haram ISIS equivalent broke into his home and went to every one of his neighbors and killed them all. So it's very ruthless there. And we know we have Christian slaves, girls taken into slavery and refused to convert. So they said, forget it. She's not leaving. She's going to be a slave for the rest of her life.
Outrageous. It really, it's heartbreaking.
It is heartbreaking.
And I think that's part of the reason why people just ignore it. They put it aside, and they think, oh, it's Africa. But
and Nigeria
are these lives less important than other places?
No, and this government is Nigeria is a democracy. It's
right.
Elected. They have a responsibility. That's really the first responsibility of any government is to protect their own citizens, all their citizens, especially those who are being targeted like this.
Hudson Institute, your colleagues have come up with some stats that I find shocking. 345 Christians are killed for faith-based reasons each month around the world. 100 churches or Christian buildings are burned or vandalized each month. Now, you recently wrote a piece in the National Catholic Register about the ongoing attacks, vandalization of French churches, Catholic churches for the most part. What's driving this?
Well, there's a range of ideologies behind it. They're attacked mainly because, well, they're attacked because they're unprotected, but beyond that, they're attacked because of Catholic teachings that are, or the symbol of Western civilization that these churches symbolize, represent, or Christianity. And so they're attacked by a range of anarchists, social libertarians, Satanists, a small Satan community, radical Islam. Again, remember the priest who had his throat slit on the Father Hamo, on the altar in Normandy a couple years ago. But there are hundreds of churches that have been set afire, set aflame, or looted or vandalized, and we know who they are. The French government is not very good about arresting and apprehending and prosecuting these people at all, and they don't investigate it. But they
are they afraid to figure out who did it?
They're afraid to confront that, and but we have a clue because they leave behind slogans graffitied onto the walls of these ancient cathedrals and churches, and it's blessed abortion is one slogan, or homophobe, calling the priest a homophobe. I mean, it's just horrible desecration, and especially of the Blessed Sacrament. Yeah. So and it's. It's hundreds of churches again, and there's a great a Christian observatory in Europe based in Vienna that tracks all this, observatory on discrimination against Christians. And
I need to talk about China for a moment, which we've talked about before. Such heinous attacks, death, arresting of people for their faith, particularly Catholics. There was the president has been engaged with China on a trade deal.
Yes.
Human rights and religious rights are not surfacing in those talks, apparently, reportedly. Why not?
They should be. This is, again, China is a different category altogether from what we were just talking about, because then it's not just passive resistance or
or individuals. This is state sanctioned.
This is state doing it. They're blowing up the churches, not filled with worshipers, but they're destroying churches actively. They're arresting and brainwashing and monitoring, with a high-tech surveillance of Christians, saying that banning all minors under the age of 18 from entering a church. Outrageous. Saying seniors can't get their pensions if they go to church. So there's whole categories of people that are being, prevented from having their right to religious freedom. Yeah, and we didn't raise this as we used to during the Soviet period. We used to raise it with the Soviet Union, the human rights, the religious freedom, along with trade, along with defense negotiations, and we need to do that.
Yeah, they need to be bundled. Otherwise, you don't get any. You don't get any relief from them. No. The United States International Religious Freedom Commission, in their recent report, one of the commissioners writes that the Vatican-China deal is one of the most alarming incidents as it relates to religious freedom in the entire year. They say the Vatican has a hand in this, and they should find a way to fix what's happening to their religious adherents in China. Do you agree?
Well, it's hard to say what is the worst. There have been so many atrocities, but certainly I was opposed to this deal. I said it was worse than we even thought it was once it was implemented and became clear that there was no reciprocity. The government of China has not recognized any of the underground bishops. and has.
And they're now picking bishops.
And now they're picking bishops, and they're saying, that they're going to tamper with ideology as well, with the church teachings, the substance of what we believe, because they want President Xi's teachings to replace. In fact, his photograph has replaced the portrait of Jesus Christ in some of the churches.
gosh.
Yeah, so it's going to be a church, a Catholic church that is forced to rally around the Communist Party, and that's going to be, they're going to be used as a soft power instrument for the communist government of China, and that's very frightening.
Unbelievable. Christian refugees are down 47% since 2016. To what do you attribute that? I know there's been a clampdown on all refugees for national security reasons, purportedly. I thought there was going to be a preference for Christian refugees.
Well, that was a misstatement of what eventually emerged from the immigration policy of the Trump administration. It was supposed to be the Christians were going to be put on equal footing.
Right.
And, I think that there could be many more refugees brought in who are Christian because of the persecution in certain countries. But the persecution has gone down in certain places where ISIS has been, the caliphate has been destroyed. So that was a large generator of refugees. Today, Nigeria is a large generator of refugees. Somalia, there's still some Christians there. You have Asia Bibi. She's
Right, update us on Asia
yeah.
Bibi, who was in Pakistan. They claim she's going to be released. When? The Prime Minister said she's going to be released.
Yeah, I last saw that it was going to be in mid-May. So, we're watching, but I think that the United States could be doing a lot more to put diplomatic pressure on that government. I know another government has given her asylum. We did not step forward and do that, but another government has. I know that there's been, transportation arranged for her to leave by another source. But she needs to, she's been mistreated and denied justice for so long, Raymond. You know that she was on, because you tracked it, 9 years on death row for something that she didn't do. She was acquitted of all the
and then they were
allegations
feared.
of
They
blasphemy.
said if we free her, she'll die. They'll kill her. So, so we keep her.
So
they
she's
keep
under
her.
house arrest and has been since October when she
Wow.
was released. When the Supreme Court of Pakistan, after 9 years, decided to acquit her, she's been still, for 6 months now.
Well, let's
under
hope
house
she
arrest.
quickly is released
Yeah,
and gets.
thank you for
Do you know
watching that.
what's the home country? What's the country she'll go to?
I don't want to say.
Oh, you don't?
because
Okay, I
we don't-
understand. We'll keep it quiet. The Iraq and Syrian refugees, many of them left, these Christians, left Iraq and Syria because of ISIS. Now ISIS is gone. They're not returning home.
Right.
Why?
Well, the Nineveh plain, Raymond, it's a very serious situation, is being threatened now by another force, and that's Iran. Iran has taken over several towns. There are only a handful, or less than a dozen Christian towns in Nineveh plain, and one of them is Bataniya. And I was told by someone who was just there, an American observer, that the only living thing he saw there was a dog, that there were no Christians left in this town. Another town, Bartella, this is a town where there's now 80% Shia. This is a Shia Muslim place because Iran militias are moved in, and because the Christians feel threatened by the Iranian militias, and that's why they don't resettle there. So some are well, I think that the United States has to take this into calculation when it's Iran policy. So I hope there will be something. They need to do that. Vice President Pence has been very, very solid about committing to save the Christian population that was threatened by genocide by ISIS. Let's don't forget that. This is genocide survivors that we're talking about. And these people, in many cases, want to go home. This is, they've been there for thousands of years. Their family, their patrimony is there, their religious patrimony. And they have to be helped with protection. Once again, it comes down to security and protection. There is no police force, no militia that protects them.
Nina Shea, as always, thank you
you.
so much for being here. You can follow Nina at the Center for Religious Freedom at the Hudson Institute. Go to hudson.org. Well, Will Wilder 3, The Amulet of Power, is in bookstores, but I have a special announcement. I am going to be in Fairfax, Virginia, May 4th, Saturday, May 4th at noon, and in New Orleans the following weekend, May 11th, in New Orleans at Octavia Books. I'll be signing books. All the details are at raymondarroyo.com. Come out and see me. We're going to have a great time. And all the details are there on the website. Until then, you can follow me on Facebook, like me on Twitter. And of course, you know where to find us. We're here every week. And until next week, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, thank you for watching. I'm Raymond Arroyo from Washington, D.C. Bye now.